Hi everyone, and welcome to the fourth instalment of Climate Case Ireland's winter webinar series. My name is Matthew and I'm joined by my colleagues Clodagh, Emer and Helena. This webinar, like our previous three webinars, will be recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube channel in case any of you wish to watch it back or you want to share it with anyone who you think might be interested. Our topic today is about securing workers' rights and a just transition for all. We have three expert speakers with us who I'll introduce in just a minute. But just to say that if anyone has any questions they want to ask, please put them in the Q&A box and we can ask them at the end of the webinar. Our first speaker today is Lene Olsen, who works for the International Labour Organization's Bureau for Worker Activities. Among other areas, she is in charge of environmentally sustainable development and has previously worked on the ILO project, Trade Unions and Environmentally Sustainable Development. Her recent publications include articles on how international labour standards can be used to address the challenges of climate change and the creation of jobs in a just transition framework. Our second speaker is Samantha Smith from the Just Transition Centre, which was established by the International Trade Union Confederation and partners with unions and workers to plan for a just transition at all levels. Sam started out as a corporate litigation attorney in the US and has won awards for her pro bono work in racial justice, reproductive rights and poverty. She is previously the global and climate energy leader for World Wildlife Fund and has also served as director of their Arctic programme, working with both Indigenous peoples and governments. And our third speaker today is Sinéad Mercier, who is an Irish consultant on climate change law with a focus on just transition. She has previously worked with the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, National Economic and Social Council, the Green Party and Philip Lee Law Firm. Her new book, Men Who Eat Ringforts, written with Michael Holly and Eddie Lanahan, is available now. So I'm hoping it's going to be a fascinating conversation. I'm going to pass you over to our first speaker today, who is Lene from the International Labour Organization. So you have the floor there, Lene.
Thank you, Matthew, and good evening from Geneva to all of you. As Matthew say, I'm working in the International Labour Organization in the Bureau for Workers' Activities, which is the department that deals particularly with trade unions and ensure that workers' concerns are integrated in everything that the ILO is doing. The ILO is also working on climate change and environmental issues, particularly with a focus on jobs and just transition. And we have a Green Jobs program, a department that assists countries worldwide by building relevant ILO expertise and tools in different areas of work. And I will come back to the specific services of the Green Jobs program, but first, I would like to present the guidelines that we use to carry out this work. And this ILO, and the title, it's very long. It's called ILO Guidelines for a Just Transition Towards Environmentally Sustainable Economies and Societies for All. I will refer to it as the guidelines in the continued speech here. They were developed at a tripartite expert meeting, tripartite expert group in 2015. And what do I mean with tripartite? The ILO is a tripartite organization, the only one in the UN family, representing not only governments as in the other organizations, but also representatives of employers and workers' organizations. So the experts came from these three groups. And these guidelines are tools for governments, workers and employers organizations that they can use when they are discussing and implementing policies for a transition towards not only a green society, but also a more socially sustainable society. So what are the objectives of these guidelines? Well, they can be described with 3 Ps, planning, participation, and poverty eradication. Planning, because the transition we know will have huge impact on jobs and workplaces. And we do not want to close down polluting industries from one day to another, as sometimes we can see. And we want to ensure also that workers in these industries are supported through, for instance, social protection, skills upgrading, early retirement schemes, etc. And also that new green industries can be established in communities where we see that polluting industries are closed down to avoid also redundancies, eventual redundancies. So we need a planned transition, and there will be no just transition by default, only by design, we believe. And this planning needs participation by the world of work, by governments, by workers and employers organization, and we focus on through social dialogue. And social dialogue is, in our view, in the ILO's view, a precondition for a just transition. And we want to see particularly the social partners participate in both discussing and implementing the nationally determined contribution of the Paris Agreement in all countries. And finally, just transition is also about poverty eradication and leaving no one behind. We want to see working and living conditions improved, and we want decent work. And in an ILO perspective, just transition has two dimensions. It has a transitional dimension, but it also has an outcome dimension. So the process is, of course, how are we getting from polluting industries to greener industries? And we believe that this transition should be a managed transition with meaningful social dialogue, as I have mentioned. Also to ensure that the burden sharing is just and nobody is left behind. And then, of course, we have the outcome. What kind of society do we want? We do not necessarily only want a green society. We also want a society where jobs are decent jobs, and an inclusive society with eradication of poverty as a goal. And in my view, this outcome is only possible with the involvement also of workers' organization, trade unions. I would like to also highlight a few sections of these guidelines. Of course, I don't have time to go into the details, but will stress a few points. The guideline has a vision, guiding principles, and a key policy areas, and an annex, which I will come back to. So the guiding principles, some of them, first, very important that we have to respect fundamental principles and rights at work, ensure, as I have stressed, that we have social dialogue at all levels, but also that we take into account the gender dimensions. Women are particularly vulnerable, particularly to the effects of climate change and other forms of environmental degradation. So it's important to have that in mind. And another aspect, there is no one size fits all. And this principle is really very important because voices have sometimes argued that the guidelines can be followed by developed countries only. And this is completely wrong. The guidelines are for all countries, developed and developing countries. And they are addressing also all sectors, not only the energy sector. We have, of course, heard a lot of the transition from coal to renewables, and this is this is of course true. But there is also we believe that the guidelines says that we will have a transition in all sectors. So this is important to have in mind. There is this section of policy areas, 9 policy areas, and it highlights the importance of addressing both challenges and opportunities with a coherent policy framework, and they should be addressed jointly. And this is, of course, a challenge, not to have a kind of a pick and choose of the different policy areas, but to have this kind of coherent policy framework that is so important. So we do not necessarily only looking at skills in the transition on rights, but also looking at enterprises, occupational health and safety, etc., social protection, etc. Finally, the annex also has the guidelines also has an annex, which is an important element which should not be neglected, even though it's an annex. And it includes references to international labor standards and resolutions that could be useful in the transition, and which I believe should go hand in hand with the guidelines. And each policy areas addressed in the guidelines have relevant international labor standards, which I think could be important tools to use. And I also believe that we could use the ILO supervisory mechanism to make sure that the international labor standards really are applied in the transition. So this for very short presentation of the guidelines. I will say a few words about the Green Jobs program and the activities and services, if you allow, and colleagues can come back to if they want more details on the guidelines in the question and answer session. So the Green Jobs program is a small department in the ILO, and the activities are ranging from knowledge creation, advocacy, capacity building, diagnostics, and policy advice. We are publishing studies, sharing experiences from different countries on linkages between labor and environmental issues. When it comes to advocacy, we have we're building partnerships with other organizations, but also institutes on different issues, and also following key negotiations and processes in order to ensure, international policy coherence. And we have followed all the, also the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Capacity building, we are providing constituents and others with the opportunities to learn about green jobs concepts, particularly in collaboration with our training center in Turin, in Italy. And we're also doing diagnostics by identifying economic sectors with potential for green job creation through national green jobs assessments. And I can talk more about that if we have time also afterwards. And then, of course, also policy advice for the formulation and implementation of national or sector policies that foster green jobs, social inclusions, and improve sustainability. So that was a little snapshot of what we are doing, which I can come back to with more details in the session on questions and answer. Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks, Lena. I think you did a great job of summing up some of the ILO's work there. So now over to Samantha, who's going to talk a little bit about her work with the Just Transition Centre, please.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. And hey, Lena. So of course, it's very convenient for me to follow Lena because all of our work is based on the ILO guidelines. So now you just sort of have in your mind what Lena just told you about the guidelines as I explain what we do. So in fact, the trade union movement had been fighting for more than a decade to get a UN standard on just transition and to get architecture, including in the Paris Agreement, that incorporated just transition. And so we were super excited to get the ILO guidelines in 2015, and then also to see that in the Paris Agreement, you have this reference to the imperative of the just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs. And as trade unionists, we interpret that as meaning that everything that governments and also non-parties do on climate action must include this aspect of just transition. Just to sort of go a little deeper on two things that Lena mentioned. So the guidelines are basically say that unless climate action is based on social dialogue, it's not just transition. It might be something else that's really good, brings down emissions, has a social aspect. But again, what that means, social dialogue is a very specific thing. It means that trade unions have been at the table with employers and with governments, often with governments negotiating an outcome. Now, that doesn't mean there's no role for anybody else, because the guidelines also talk about stakeholder engagement, and they don't just mean this kind of box checking exercise. They mean that you have to have this broad and also deep process with key actors in civil society, not always the same as social dialogue, but going along in parallel, where you try to build social support and get input for what kind of plan you want, basically, right? So that's also how we work. And whenever anyone asks us, like, what is just transition? We just sort of point to the ILO and the guidelines and we say, the UN has figured it out for us. Now the question is, how do we do it here where we are? And that takes me to how we got started with the Just Transition Center. So in 2016, ITUC and its affiliates, and just to say what ITUC is maybe, we're the global peak body for most of the world's unions. So through our affiliates, we represent 200 million plus organized workers in 162 countries. And so, you know, after the Paris Agreement, the ILO guidelines, our affiliates are sort of like, okay, this is really good, but now we actually have to do this. So like, how are we going to do that? So ITUC established the Just Transition Center, and we're really, I mean, we're working in a pretty practical way. I would almost say it's sort of like grass tops activity with our affiliates, the national federations like the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and their affiliates like the energy sector unions in Ireland or the service sector unions in Ireland, to get concrete plans for just transition. And I can just give you some examples maybe. So I spent a good part of today in a part of a virtual roundtable that we're doing with energy and mining and heavy industry unions from across Central and Eastern Europe, plus national federations. So think like Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and so on. And the subject of that roundtable, which started out with just us, just unions, like having, you know, many hours of strategy discussions. And then today we had some employers who were brave enough to join with all the trade unions. And next time we'll have the European Commission, is to come up with demands, definitely on the European policy level, that will make sure that the Green Deal and the Just Transition Mechanism are actually good for workers and for people who should be our members in Central and Eastern Europe. And so, and then the other part of it is that, as you probably know, there's, you know, going to be a fund for regional transition in the EU, the Just Transition Fund and Mechanism. I think there might even be a regional plan for Ireland in there. And so we were also hearing from the affiliates, like, what is it that they need at a regional basis in order to get a just transition? You know, is it investment? As Lene said, you know, we can't just talk about skills. We have to talk about creating jobs. When do those jobs come? What kind of quality of the jobs? So where we hope this is going to end up is good policies at the European level on delivery of the recovery funds, the national recovery plans, the just transition plans. And then our role is going to be to support us, maybe not all of them, but some of these affiliates in coming up with their own plans for just transition, which could be demands to national government, or it could be a set of demands in a collective bargaining process with a big multinational employer. Just to give some other examples, we so talk about the US, which is not as painful a topic as it was a few weeks ago. Let me put it that way. Still not great, but not quite so painful. So we've been working with the US affiliates for a while, about 3-4 years, basically since I started, to try to figure out how to, what it would take for both to get a transition to renewable energy in the power sector, but also to make sure that those new jobs in the power sector were good jobs. Because what's happened in the US, along with many other places to some extent, including Ireland, is that all jobs in traditional fossil fuel-based industries tend to be like, we've had plenty of time to organize those jobs. They're like critical sectors for society. We keep the lights on. And so those jobs tend to have high quality and good union density. So high number of trade unionists in the companies. Many of them are also public sector, not in the US so much. And renewable energy jobs often, you know, especially in the construction phase, but also in operation, they tend to be really shitty jobs, right? Like anti-union employers, you know, poor wages, bad health and safety, and so on. And this is also true, for example, even in the offshore wind sector in the UK, where Prospect Union has done a pretty good study looking at the job quality of jobs in offshore wind. So we with some others helped to put together a voluntary pledge targeted to big Europe-based renewable energy companies that are developing all over the world. And this pledge, although voluntary, has also very high standards, right? So like basically decent job standards. And in theory should apply to the operations of these companies everywhere and through their supply chain. And then through a combination of different activities, including cooperation with the ILO and launching it at the UN Secretary General Climate Summit, whatever, now most of the world's big renewable energy companies are signed up to it. And what we've done with this pledge is actually to use it as a kind of carrot or maybe a stick to get the companies to sit down with trade unions in the US, but also in other countries. Now we're working on some stuff in Brazil along these lines. And recently, that process where we played a small role in getting it started, including getting the leadership of our US unions over to Scandinavia to meet with the big offshore wind companies, turned into a framework agreement for the world's biggest offshore wind company, Ørsted, to cover all of its projects in the United States, so tens of thousands of jobs. They reached that agreement with the Federation of Construction Unions in the US. And what that means is, first of all, tens of thousands of secure, well-paying jobs with training for US workers, but also that the construction unions who really love, how should I say this, who are very strong supporters of fossil fuel production and have good agreements for building oil and gas pipelines, that they're now embracing offshore wind and talking about just transition and the importance of renewables. So just to kind of sum up, the way, like, our theory of change is that if you really want to do something serious about climate change, it's all sectors and all jobs. And of course, you have to start with, you know, energy and other high emitting sectors. And we, by the way, work mostly with unions from high emitting sectors, right? So coal, oil and gas, steel, auto, whatever. If you want to do something serious about climate change, you need to change the balance of forces. And, you know, if you're looking at the history of successful, like, big social and economic change, all of those movements involved usually religious people who are well organized on a global basis and numerous, but also where they exist trade unions or informal workers associations. So what we try to do is to help unions mobilize on climate change and just transition in a way that works for trade unions, which, especially right now in the middle of the COVID crisis, is all about good jobs and what we would call social protection. So like unemployment insurance, education, pension, everything. And it works, right? So when people, you know, and we've seen it over and over again, also in super hard situations like coal transition, that when the only option for people is, okay, we're going to shut a bunch of stuff down, and if you're lucky, you're going to go on benefits, then, you know, people are going to fight you with everything they have because it's pretty terrible to be unemployed. But when people are at the table, when unions are at the table, and the options aren't just shutting stuff down, but you start by making sure that there are new jobs and those new jobs are good jobs, then you will see this huge shift in the views of unions and the workers that they represent and all of the people that we think we should be representing. So I think I think I want to just close with that hopeful message that, you know, we're kind of at the end game for climate change right now, right? Like, really, it has to be now. It really should have been a while ago that we started to cut emissions. And it's really unfortunate in this situation that people who are just desperate to stay employed in secure jobs, that they're sometimes getting blamed for trying to hang on to those jobs. And I'm talking about our members. And I think the thing that we've learned through this kind of practical work is that when people have other options for good jobs, then they also change their political positions and many other things become possible. So I'll just leave it there. I'm happy to take some questions when we get to that point.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Samantha. And I think it was very interesting as well to see how the ILO and the ITUC kind of interact with each other there. We were talking about the guidelines at the beginning. Now pass it over to Sinead, who's going to give us a quick talk as well. So Sinead, are you ready to go?
Great, so I'll just share my screen. Great, so delighted to be here today and listening to such interesting speakers as well, Lene and Samantha, and also Climate Case as well. Obviously, you've been doing brilliant work, especially in the Fix the Bill campaign to get just transition into the new climate, the amended climate bill. So thanks very much for all that work. So I'm just going to give a quick overview now. It's already been touched on by the other two brilliant speakers, so this will just be very quick, but just to give a quick overview of just transition and also what's happening in Ireland on the issues. So as noted by the previous speakers, you know, the Paris Agreement kind of outlines the need to protect workers in the transition to a low carbon economy when countries are reducing their emissions. And Sharon Burrow spoke on this very eloquently at the recent Just Transition conference held by the National Economic and Social Council, and there with other kind of sustainable development councils across Europe. And she said that Just Transition is kind of a call for a new social contract that recognises that past transitions didn't really go as well as planned, that globalisation brought regions that were very reliant on industrial manufacturing, when that offshored into other regions across the world, that the benefits and burdens of transition have not been equally shared. And it really sees nature as an ally, that it's not something to kind of be either like fenced off from human beings or something to be exploited by human beings, but should be seen as something that we should work with. And also there's kind of a longer tradition of the Alliance of Healthcare, Environmentalists, Trade Unionists working together to ensure that people's health and safety at work is well looked after, and that people are provided with skills and education should a place shut down. And that was particularly large in the 1970s, when the peace movement wanted to work very closely with people who worked in making atomic weapons or making chemicals manufacturing, that they wouldn't just be simply discarded when the peace movement got rid of kind of atomic use. And also there's kind of a broader discussion about the just transition, that it's a transition in general in terms of our whole economies, that it's not just based on kind of these very mono-industrial regions or these particular communities who of course must be kind of first and foremost. Workers' rights are, you know, the backbone of a just transition, but there's also a wider conception of it, of energy as a right and a public good, and also that our economies itself should be reorientated away from exploitation of people and the planet, but into kind of a more harmonious balance, such as donut economics and so on. And this is something that developing countries and countries very reliant on exporting their fossil fuel resources have very much brought to the fore. As you can see there, from 1979, the president of Mexico, after a major oil spill off the coast, asked that developed countries assist them to move away from oil into a just transition into renewables. So it has a very long kind of history. And today as well, for me, it's such an exciting topic because I suppose there's kind of a lot of utopian thinking in it, but it's not about kind of utopias in this definite place that we have to reach, this like confirmed idea that a few have to impose on the many, because we know obviously from modernity and the 1900s and the 20th century was kind of a time of utopias turning into dystopias. But after kind of, I feel that we've been caught in this kind of critical thinking that's been very negative and kind of tearing down ideas, while this is very much about building new ideas, building a world, a utopian vision and a utopian process. So Just Transition is very much about that process of social dialogue, of bringing people together around a table to discuss under a kind of broad vision, while also having very practical elements such as jobs, such as workers' rights, such as good public transport for rural and urban areas, and kind of rehabilitating land. So it's very a utopian vision, but also a utopian process. So for me, it's very positive. Now the European Green Deal kind of takes those ideas. There's debate on whether it fully implements them, but it certainly does try to, under Ursula von der Leyen, try to take those kind of principles and put them into practice at a European level. And the principle of leave no one behind under the European Green Deal comes from the Sustainable Development Goals, and also attaches Just Transition to the European Pillar of Social Rights. And I'd be really interested in the Q&A to hear from the other two speakers on their vision about, you know, does that fully implement the ILO guidelines, which should be the primary basis for this, or have they been watered down a little? So that would be good to listen to. And again, wider social justice concerns, particularly in Ireland, have been raised using Just Transition language, particularly on energy poverty, which causes a significant number of deaths every year, around 250, I suppose, or so, according to evidence a few years ago. And also this kind of idea that there's an old concept of mehel in Irish culture, scacha chéile a war na daoine, so under each other's shadow, the people survive or live. And, you know, turf cutting or cutting the bog for more vulnerable people of the community is still alive tradition today. In the modern era, how can we pay people or provide for people to rehabilitate that bog, while also providing an end to energy poverty? And also as well, in this modernist thinking or eco-modernity, what is that? I think there's a really important role for artists in kind of reimagining the state and moving from that kind of facilitative state that allows capital and allows markets to perform these exploitative ideas, or which is also in fact a lot of green thinking, that there's no alternative to current market mechanisms or market-based approaches to climate action, which we now know after 30 years of using emissions trading schemes or, you know, consumer-based taxes, which work within a market-based framework, that doesn't work, as Greta Thunberg kind of said at Davos, I think, was it last year, you know, 30 years doing nothing, or 30 years of failed enterprises and failed activities. How can we reimagine a new way of doing things that does have this kind of new social contract? So one piece of work that has been done is the National Economic and Social Council report addressing employment vulnerability as part of a Just Transition in Ireland. And Michael D. Higgins, in a very rare moment, fully endorsed this report by NESC, which is a social dialogue body. It's kind of a state think tank that brings together business, trade unions and civil society, including environmental NGOs and social justice groups, together to kind of debate and hash out proposals for the long-term priorities of the state. And he described this report on Just Transition as kind of the next Whitaker report, or a new kind of economic plan for Ireland. So the kind of endorsement is very strong. And the research I did for that report looked at 4 case studies of Just Transition in Scotland, 2 in Germany, the Coal Exit Commission, and the Ruhr Valley, which took 60 years. Unfortunately, we don't have 60 years this time. And also it looked at Australia as well, the Latrobe Valley in Australia. And I relied actually, Samantha and Lene Olsen, on a lot of your writings on this topic. So thank you very much for that. But I won't have time to go into these in detail, but if people want to look them up, it's there if you look up Lessons for Ireland on the NESC website. But one thing I do want to put home is that very much kind of the state does have to roll up its sleeves and kind of broker a deal between workers and provide that orderly phase out. Now, the phase out shouldn't mean delay or delaying climate action or close down of a highly polluting activity, but the state does have to get involved. And that's kind of very much a crux point for us when I suppose government is more used to that kind of more neoliberal approach of maybe attracting investment into an area, facilitating it with tax breaks, rather than seeing what the strengths of an area are and building that up. But we have done that before in Ireland. There's good examples of it, like the Littleton closure of the briquette factory, and also kind of closure of kind of large multinationals in Ireland. We've provided transitional support, so it can be done. So just quickly to go through what's happening at an Irish level. So trade unions have been very dynamic on this now since 2015. SIP2 have published a booklet for their workers. They've run a few talks on it. Force as well published one of the first studies using research from the IIEA and Joseph Curtin. And the Irish Congress of Trade Unions as well has held maybe 2 or 3 conferences on just transition as well. Trademark Belfast and also NERI as well. I should put that up. They've also been, which is a think tank for the trade unions, they've all been doing very good work. The Climate Change Advisory Council as well has really been stepping up on this matter. It has tended to be dominated by kind of neoclassical type of economics, but Anna Davies, who I actually rely on a lot for this presentation, has been doing really good work, and so has Sabrina Decker and a number of other people within there. So I really recommend looking at some of the reports there. Also under the Climate Action Plan 2019 and Future Jobs Plan, the National Economic and Social Council were tasked with doing the report that I just mentioned. The Midlands Regional Transition Team was set up, which is a group, again, kind of a social dialogue group that looked at just transition in the Midlands, and a Just Transition Review Group, which was kind of a dialogue body, was due to be set up under NESC. And hopefully the government will do that soon enough, because it is desperately needed. Also as well, the Co-Regions and Transition Platform, we've gotten advice on that. And the Kieran Mulvey was appointed as a Just Transition Commissioner in November 2019. He publishes interim report in April 2020. However, a number of the recommendations haven't yet been implemented, though I suppose there has been a pandemic. But there is kind of a sense in the Midlands of very much kind of stasis. There's a feeling that the new works, new jobs and new employment that are planned under government funding aren't actually going to be of the same quality and same paying conditions as previous work. So this was something that was mentioned with the recent 108 million from government to do further peatland rehabilitation. There's 350 jobs kind of planned under that, which is very positive. But there's kind of no information or transparency just yet about, well, what are the paying conditions of these jobs? Will it be the same as, will these be workers redeployed from Bord na Móna on current contracts into new work? Those kind of issues haven't really been hashed out at a local level, and there's kind of a lack of kind of communication and transparency on that. And as well, kind of, I've been speaking with kind of more community groups such as Rathangan, Creative Rathangan, who had a very great conference there at the weekend. And they say as well that there's kind of, like, which is reiterated by Kieran Mulvey in his own report, that there's kind of a real dynamism in the Midlands, a real kind of need and a vision there from local people and local workers as well, who have this great tradition of kind of this very kind of socially rooted semi-state within the Midlands, which had this real kind of entrepreneurial focus in the 1930s, kind of real dynamism in terms of building like wonderful kind of architectural sites for the workers, a real vision of kind of a new state rebuilding itself after colonization. And that voice and that tradition is still there, but it's not really kind of been harnessed or been brought into kind of being. There's no facilitative kind of structures for it other than the Midlands Transition Team, which I think now has lapsed. And in his report, the Kieran Mulvey kind of recommended kind of immediate impacts of closures be kind of something be done there. He recommended a Centre for Excellence on Climate Action, multi-annual steady funding rather than kind of ad hoc funding with kind of the Just Transition Fund, for example, which is a ring-fenced carbon tax. That's quite kind of focused on a couple of projects, or a good number of projects, which is very positive, but it isn't kind of that long-term funding that's required. Also as well, kind of what is the plan for Moneypoint, the old coal station, kind of larger kind of land redevelopment in terms of biodiversity and so on, and alternative jobs, so people don't have to commute to Dublin. What kind of has been created so people don't have to leave the region or commute outside the region? Those are kind of key questions. So next steps I would kind of recommend, and I'll be ending here, is in terms of kind of, I suppose, one thing that's major is a clear definition of what just transition means in the Irish context. So there's a lack of reference to just transition. But climate justice, for example, is the government is required to take climate justice into account when it's developing its local adaptation plans and its sectoral kind of adaptation plans and its national mitigation plan. However, it's not really referred to that much, only in a kind of development context in terms of international countries in development. But just transition as well was referred to in the Climate Action Plan. But what exactly justice is, and justice as defined by who, needs also to be kind of developed. And this is where social dialogue really comes in. Who gets define justice, and whose conception of justice? I mean, is it simply what we speak about with the carbon tax, which is kind of what was referred to in terms of just transition in the last climate national mitigation plan and national adaptation action plan, sorry, all the plans. But in that last plan, the distributive impact of the carbon tax was kind of considered in this just transition context. But is that the fullest conception of just transition, or are there wider implications? Is a tax the kind of the only way that we would want to conceptualize, transition? And also, what is the role of the European Pillar of Social Rights as well in all this, as required under the European Green Deal? We also need kind of an overarching forum, definitely for a deliberative process, which could be the Just Transition Fund. And there's a definite lack of community participation as well in all of this. So the climate dialogue was set up under Minister Denis Naughten. However, it had kind of minimal engagement, vulnerable groups such as travellers groups, disability groups, youth participation, that was very much lacking. They weren't kind of brought in, the procedures and dialogue wasn't brought to people, and there was no mechanism to include any of their participation in the Climate Action Plan. And there's also a complete lack of data on who actually is vulnerable in Ireland. So the climate modelling that we do have on the transition and how the transition will affect jobs is based on the carbon tax. So how the carbon tax will impact on Ireland from the ESRI. That's not an accurate reflection of vulnerability in a jobs context, or even in terms of kind of how travellers will be affected, how people with disabilities, how women will be affected. And that data really needs to be there. And fundamentally as well, I think we to reconceptualise the idea of the state, that it's not just there to facilitate, to facilitate the market or facilitate capital. It's there to do what, it's done many times before, particularly kind of in the Ardna Crusher scheme, really take the transition in hand and lead and develop it. And there's a good, really good book there I recommend, The Entrepreneurial State. Now it's quite a productive, it's not very degrowth perspective, but just as one example. So I'll leave it there as I'm a bit over time, but thanks very much. So.
Thank you so much for that, Sinead. That was brilliant. We're just going to go to a Q&A now, but just before we ask if anyone, any of our attendees have a question, I think, Sinead, did you say you had a question for our other two speakers?
Oh, yes. I just kind of, because I was surprised that when I was reading the European Green Deal, it does mention the need for any just transition plans to be in keeping with the European Pillar of Social Rights. However, I can't really find, I found kind of some questions from Olivier de Schutter, who's now the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. And he was kind of saying that it's not exactly kind of the European Convention on Human Rights. There seems to be a bit of a gap anyway, like what exactly the connection is between the two. So if you've heard anything on a human rights-based approach to just transition, I'd be delighted.
Yes, Samantha, do you want to answer that?
I mean, I can try, bearing in mind that I spent a good part of today, as I said, online with unions in Central and Eastern Europe who are in the sort of hard, pointy end of industrial transition. Overall, the green recovery, the multi-year budget, the Just Transition Fund, like they have sort of the right framing, but the actual practice has not been great. And there's been relatively little engagement with trade unions on a range of issues, including in platforms like the Coal Regions in Transition platform, which was initially meant to be a kind of combination of social dialogue and social dialogue, precursor to social dialogue and stakeholder engagement. And what we're seeing is that, as always in the EU, you have this tension between things that sound really good when they're first launched, where you're like, yes, we're going to get Just Transition, we've got the social pillar, but then in the implementation, it's pretty neoliberal. So what we would like to see, and I realize this is like many levels down from a human rights-based approach, what we would like to see for a real just transition in Europe is, one, a greater focus on poverty alleviation, super important right now with the crisis that we have in employment. Also in Europe, we have, so many people unemployed. That also has implications for how and where money gets spent, right? I mean, after listening to our brothers, especially from the Romanian trade unions, you can see that there are huge differences between European, even in the Central and Eastern European region. I think the other thing is about real social dialogue. So again, like social dialogue is almost non-existent in some of the Central and Eastern European countries. People are being denied fundamental labor rights as well. And so unless that's fixed, it's really not possible to have a real just transition. So I can go on always. There are lots of things we don't like as trade unions, but I would say that these sort of big expressions of goodwill, the reliance on the social pillar, not enough. Right, so we're going to have to see a different approach also at the European level if it's really going to do something in line with the ILO guidelines.
Hi, I see that there is a question in our Q&A box, and I believe it's addressed to all of the panelists. So it's essentially, what advice would the panelists have for communicating climate justice, just transition challenges to local communities who may not think it's urgent in tackling other crises such as biodiversity loss or refugees? And the person who's asked this question says that they understand that these issues are all interconnected and that the use of the Sustainable Development Goals can help communicate this, but would the panelists have any tips in making it really relevant at a local level?
Is there anyone who wants to take that? Anyone who wants to go first, or?
Well, what we have seen, it's sometimes a challenge to work on the different levels and also to have information of what's happened at one level. I'm thinking particularly of what we are doing at international level, and also sometimes when I'm talking to, and particularly trade union organizations at different levels, they're not always aware of what's happening within the same organization or within the same country, what is happening at the international level, regional level, or a sectoral level. So I think there is also a challenge from a union perspective, workers' organization perspective, to be able also to communicate downwards to rank and file what is happening at the national level, and also, you know, so that comes and also the other way around, that what is doing at the local level, even at enterprise level, and communicate what is done at that level also up to the national level, because that is sometimes, you know, it's not easy.
Sinead, do you have anything to add to that, or does Samantha want to speak next?
I suppose Samantha just mentioned there in the chat. So Samantha, you go first.
Okay, I can go after you. All right. Yeah, no, we do have some experience with this, and some of it is sort of painful experience where you learn by doing things wrong, and the experience is basically just using, you know, sort of fundamental principles of organizing, right? And that principle, the first principle is, it's not about you, it's about them. So when you're talking, so for us, if we're talking to a group of coal miners, or let's say oil workers in Alberta, Canada, that was one of my early experiences. Or if you're in Katowice with the Polish mining and energy unions, you're spending way more time listening than you are talking, and you're trying to understand what's important to them. And we do find, as that example I gave about the US maybe helped to illustrate, that when when what you are talking about, or what you're trying, the solutions you're trying to get to, when those address what matter to people, like what are their core concerns and how is this issue connecting with their core concerns, then people will be pretty motivated. They'll have lots of ideas themselves, they'll see ways forward, and they'll be pretty motivated to listen to you. Sometimes that's a challenge, right? Because we live in capitalism, we live in patriarchy, we live in a racist society. And all of these things can present some structural barriers to talking to people about, for example, refugees and so on. But often you can find a way in just by listening to people, whether that way in is religion, like faith-based discussion, or whether it's just about good jobs, or whether it's about people's feelings about their community and things that they value about the community, including the natural setting, or their relatives who are employed, for example, in fisheries or in forestry and are, losing their jobs because of biodiversity loss. So it's always about starting with what's next to you and to the people that you're engaging with, and working out from there.
Yes, so just to agree there, Samantha, with yourself, I really do. I think the importance of listening is kind of the key to this. Certainly in my own work, I recently did a report there for the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission on climate change and human rights in Ireland, and there's a huge gap in data. I mean, when the government kind of speaks of vulnerability to climate change, they speak in terms of business vulnerability. They speak in terms of perhaps kind of property being impacted, say in coastal areas or by flooding. And they speak in kind of, particularly in terms of agriculture, the vulnerability of agriculture, which obviously, has major human implications. I mean, still agriculture is one of the most dangerous kind of workplaces in Ireland today. But I suppose vulnerability, we know at a broad level internationally that kind of already vulnerable groups, such as people with disabilities, travellers, kind of people in poverty, women, they will be worst affected by climate, but we don't know where they are. We don't know, and I think we don't know how these people conceptualize what they are facing in their own language. I mean, the approach of climate action, unfortunately, very often tends to be kind of coming with a particular language, a particular technocratic kind of language of climate, and then trying to get communities to speak in that, rather than maybe listening to what they are facing themselves and trying to kind of weave that into a broader climate kind of conception. or conception of, and that's where climate justice comes from, that kind of bottom-up perspective. So like one thing I found working on trying to ban oil and gas exploration off the Irish coast was Irish fishermen in my local area in Russellville like hated Shell more than I could ever imagine possible. And that kind of the impact that oil and gas exploration has off the coast on fishing activity in like the Porcupine Basin, which is where a lot of fishing occurs, and exploration still occurs there during the summer, which is kind of the height of the fishing period. So that kind of clash, there are many of those communities across Ireland that we can work with. And I think as well, in terms of just transition in the Midlands, I think that people do understand. I mean, one thing that really surprised me, or what didn't surprise me, but it surprised me that it wasn't spoken about enough, is that the 4 unions involved in Bord na Móna and the ESB actually voted themselves to accept the closure of the coal plants and the peat plants. They themselves acknowledged that, okay, this does have to happen from a climate perspective, that's fine, but we want a just transition along with that. And that decision was made about 5 years ago at this stage. And yet, you know, the government continued to facilitate Bord na Móna, or not Bord na Móna, but continued to facilitate extraction until, you know, environmental lawyers kind of took them to task for it. And I think that needs to be understood, that people do understand that this needs to happen. We just need to find the language that they're using and move. As the Scottish Just Transition Commission themselves, they say that they work from the basis of already existing injustices and weaving climate action into a manner that addresses those injustices at the same time as taking climate action. And I think we need to have that same perspective.
So thanks very much to all of our panelists for responding to that question. And I see there's another question in the Q&A box. If we have time, maybe for another 5 minutes, if the panelists, are the panelists okay with that arrangement? We just have one question first. The first question here is from Deirdre Joyce. The first question is from her: Is justice, is this justice transition, is this context specific, or is justice itself concept which is specific to context? And just related, then another question then she poses here is just raising the point that framework is for a just transition is vitally important, but the engagement side is critical for communities as well as employers and employees. However, she notes that there's an absence of dialogue, or certainly not visible dialogue about the requirements in relation to just transition. And so from the panelists, I got what she wants to know is from panelist experience, whether there is in certain contexts a wider discussion on the need for dialogue on the just transition and climate action. So quite a broad question there. If the panelists would like to maybe address some of those points.
I mean, I can say something about the justice issue, because Lene mentioned that when the ILO guidelines were negotiated, there were some voices saying that this is really something that's only for developed countries, and specifically like only for European trade unionism. No one else can do this. What is this social dialogue stuff? And we also experienced that, like when we, sort of tried to work with some of our affiliates in different developing countries. But we're doing it now, or rather they are doing it with a little help from us in very different contexts, from Brazil to South Africa, Colombia, India, Indonesia. And I would say that justice, so there are some absolutes about what justice is. It's not completely context specific. We have a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? Like that. And that, if you look at what's in it, including rights to food, water, dignified old age, fair wage, freedom of association, expression, that's a pretty, I won't say utopian, but a pretty strong statement of fundamental rights and of what justice means. Justice means that everybody gets those things. And the Just Transition Guidelines, even if they're framed very much as a policy document, it is a utopian vision, right? Like a world where poverty is eradicated and you have inclusion of everyone who today is marginalized, especially, but not only women. I mean, that would be amazing if we were able to do that. If all jobs were decent, everyone had social protection. But what that, like how that plays out in a specific context, even like within different European countries, but definitely between, let's say, Brazil and Canada, just it's going to look really different because you have different power relations and economic systems. But yeah, I don't think we have to be too sort of shy about saying that we know what justice is, because a lot of, many dedicated activists, both at the UN level, but then also at local levels, have struggled to show us what justice is.
If Lene or Sinead, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I would echo what Samantha said, that the concept of justice is universal, and as you also pointed out, the guidelines are for all. And okay, you can say that it's a bit utopian, but at least it's a vision that we should aspire to and work for. And this is what in what we define as a just transition. So, of course, the engagement, as the second question there, the engagement is critical, and I think that there is dialogue, and I think that there is quite a lot of engagement, and we have seen increased engagement globally, and I am also particularly referring to trade unions. Trade unions have been involved now for many years working on these issues. And I think if it hadn't been for the unions, we wouldn't have had the reference to just transition, for instance, in the Paris Agreement. And so that there is no dialogue, I don't think so. I think there is a lot of dialogue, and there is a lot of push, particularly from the unions, but also from I think employers and employers' organization now. And if we look at the last conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, employers are also coming on board and participating. Unions have been involved for many years, coming to these conferences. And at the COP in Madrid in last year, the Climate Action for Jobs initiatives was launched. Also, very much, I would say, because of the trade unions, and in this initiative, we have seen 46 countries up until now committed to support a transition by formulating national plans in line with the ILO guidelines. So that's already quite an achievement. So this is of course a new initiative. So we'll see how it will take off the ground. But the idea is to support countries on solutions for a just transition, and of course in that. Very much, bringing in both workers and employers organizations and others in partnerships to ensure this transition. But I think probably, as I said, there is this challenge of informing everybody what is going on at the international level, because I think there is a lot going on in terms of dialogue at international level. But to have that also trickle down, to other levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lena. We might just wrap up there just because we've gone past the hour mark. So just to reiterate to everyone that this webinar has been recorded and it's going to be uploaded on our YouTube channel. And if anyone has missed any of the previous 3 webinars, they're also on our YouTube channel. So just look up Climate Case Ireland. You'll find all the recordings there. So first of all, thank you to our attendees for joining us and for giving us your questions. You definitely helped there with the discussion at the end. And of course, thank you to our 3 speakers for giving us such great insights on the work that you do and all the work around just transition. So thank you from all of us at Climate Case Ireland, and good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Good night.
Thank you.